My friends, it is my great and very special privilege to invite Thérèse Bertsch to a little interview here on Poets of the East. Uh, I have always tried with Poets of the East to bring the finest poets that I know, the deepest thinkers that I know, people you should know, people you should hear from. And Thérèse is 5 stars on all those beats. So Thérèse, welcome. I'm so honored you could be with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel the same way, Rick. I
Thank you,
appreciate
my
it.
friend. So my first question is when did you start writing?
I started writing like maybe my late teens. I wrote a lot as a young mother, single mother. And then I really started to write seriously like in my 40s. And I started to go to a local poetry reading once a month, and that motivated me. And then when the pandemic hit, of course, I was going to poetry zooms, and that really motivated me.
Wonderful. When you think back to your childhood, to your young adulthood, what are some of the authors that made a big impression on you?
Well, I always loved poets, Emily Dickinson, I loved Walt Whitman, I loved, which is probably one of the reasons I wrote on the Rosary. I loved all the mystics. I loved Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Francis de Sales, um, and people who reflected on them. I loved theologians, even though I wasn't trained as a theologian. I loved theologians, philosophers, and I loved diversity. Um, I read a lot. The Brothers of Taizé are monks from Taizé. It's a very famous community, and it's Christian, but there's diversity there. But their their reflections come from their deep faith life, and so I enjoyed many of the things that Brother Roger would write. There's so many. It would be hard to say them all, but fundamentally, I think I was shaped by philosophers, theologians, and um, and poets, which is pretty interesting given that the book we're talking about, right?
Right. Okay, next question. Um, there's kind of a subtle shift, I think, for a lot of people when you transition from simply being a person that writes some things down to a person who really begins to think of themselves as a writer. Do you remember that transition for you?
Well, it's very interesting because I always wrote, and I wrote very often to solve puzzles, whether it was time or whether it was to understand spirituality or understand human nature or power. Power was a big one. But they were always like for me to solve puzzles in some ways. And occasionally I would be talking to friends or family and I'd say, I wrote a poem. Oh, let me hear it. And so I would read it and they really had very little to say back. And I kind of thought, well, that's probably not good poetry, which is all right with me. It was really for myself I was writing. And then one day, friends of mine, James and John Hagney, were having dinner, and they're both extremely brilliant and writers, and I couldn't say enough of them. And it came up, and I said, "Oh yeah, I write poetry." And they said, "Oh, read us a poem." So I read them a poem, and they said, "That's really very good, Therese." And I thought, "Oh, my poetry says something to other people." And I think I started to take myself seriously then, um, but not so much to publish. That really came when I had hired a social worker when I was the director of the housing shelter, lovely woman. And then I left and she kept asking me to come to her little restaurant she and her husband had because they had once a month this poetry reading. And I think for about 2 years I didn't go. And then finally I said, this is a disgrace. This is insulting. I have to go, because I have a big family and stuff. So anyway, I went, I loved it. And that's really when I became interested in publishing because James, one of the local publishers. He has a small little publishing company. Uh, Published many of my poems in his anthologies, and then as a scholar, I also published in some interesting places on my dissertation. And then I published for Catholic Women Speak. They were asking for essays. And so, my writing initially was in various places, and then I honed it more. It's really more now poetry, even when I want to express other things like, the terrible challenges of single mothers or poverty or, many, many things. I use poems as the vehicle to explore that.
You
I had
know,
actually I had actually told my director of my dissertation that I planned to do a play on the narratives of the women I interviewed because I felt there was so many articles on homeless single mothers, and people they put them on the shelf. The dissertations go on the shelf, and I wanted people to hear from their mouth what their experience was. But I never got to do that. But I am working on that. Like as I worked on each mystery of the Rosary in this book, I'm working on each narrative of the homeless mothers to get their story out there, because they are suffering and they're hardworking people.
I, I'm going to dare to embarrass you and say, of all the people that I know that are consider themselves Christians and practicing Christians, I've never met anyone who has really taken the Gospels to heart so much and really made it part of your life and cared for people in trouble, cared for poor people, cared for sick people. You are an exemplar human being, my friend. Uh, I just, I hope your words and your work goes so far because the compassion in your heart. When I was reading, your manuscript, what kept speaking to me was how much you have made this a living document. It's almost like you've really personified so much of that compassion. Your words are so eloquent, speaking to the human condition. This isn't fairy tale philosophy, religiosity. This is real, practical, human. Uh, the capture of the human condition. Your work is amazing, my friend. Really amazing.
In my parish, I'm a lector, and lectors read the scriptures. And I never practice because it's not a performance. I read it to make sure I know how to pronounce everything. But the only thing that I ever say before I read is, don't let me get in their way. Because I look out and I see lots and lots of people I know who all have their personal suffering. I mean, you've just been through hell with your health, and you were an example to all of us of courage. You kept trying and getting back on your feet. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. You can have 1,000 words, but when you're living that drama, it's another question. So I think that's one of the problems that all religious beliefs have, is that when they hear witness, what is witness? Witness means loving your neighbor. It doesn't mean telling them what to do. God, you're not God. I mean, that's the problem that we all make, is that, but there are historical reasons for that. I think, like in our country, I understand it because I grew up in New York, the heart of people coming from other countries and other worlds, and my own family, my grandparents, great grandparents came from Ireland and Germany. And when they came to this country, most of them, were not welcomed because they were either Catholic in an Episcopal area, or they were dark, like Italians, Southern Italians had darker complexion, whatever. I mean, they even didn't like each other. Catholics didn't like Italians, Polish didn't like Germans, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, I mean, but I think that to preserve, like, they were all people in grief because they left their countries of origin. They would never go back or see them even now. Today, it's a whole different picture, right? And so that to preserve their faith and their belief system, to preserve their culture, they became very, very evangelical, and expecting certain things from everyone. which was never the intention of the gospel life and the gospel community, you know. So I think, look, that people did the best they could. That they were steeped in grief, and I am so grateful to my ancestors for all that they went through. I mean, so many of them came here, and there's alcoholism was raging, you know, especially in the Irish community, German community. Why? Because they were full of grief. There was no medications. I mean, they had the same issues that we have today, but there was no medication. And yet they persevered and they tried to do the right thing and they try to keep getting up, you know. So I think we owe them so much. And the thing, one of the things in the book that, I mean, look, the book is not theology. It's a relationship. It's a way of 85 years of living with faith and wonderful people who, I mean, with lots of flaws, and they would be the first to say it, my parents, but wonderful, very dedicated to their neighbor. They knew nothing else but loving your neighbor. I mean, I lived for a time in a project because my parents were trying to buy a house in Howard Beach. They couldn't buy it. The woman died. You know, they were in Glendale. We moved to a veterans project, which was completely middle income and completely integrated. I never heard the word out of their mouth, black, Negro, different. I never heard it. They were my friends, and they'd call them by their name, and their parents came into our house, and they were just typical Irish German people. They were not unusual people, but they had a very deep faith. And the thing that directed them their whole life was love your neighbor as yourself. And I think, boy, that's a curative. Even today, with people have to ask themselves, are you loving your neighbor as yourself? I mean, that's simple, you know. Anyway, a lot of the book, I think, a lot of our problems come like when we try to understand faith or our religion. We have a sense of time that's linear, and you know, with the great creator of us all, it's not linear. You know, I mean, in fact, I have a sense of things. I don't know if it's true. I'm not a theologian, but I have a sense when I look at life, like the Alpha and the Omega, I think everything happened at once. And I think God was invested in every moment of that happening at once. So that before whatever this symbolism, and it's symbol that, you know, Adam and Eve somehow divided from their unity with one another and with God, whatever that represented in the spiral of evolution, I have no idea. But I believe God was already there, and so was Our Lady at the center of time, you know. The other thing that I say, I like sprinkle throughout this are my own experiences, right?
Sure.
I can remember being in the A&P and typical shopping day. And suddenly I had this blast of images in my head of Mary in all of her manifestations, like Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Czestochowa. And I was exhausted from it. I wasn't out of my body. It wasn't a mystical experience. I had absolutely no idea why that happened. I had absolutely no idea why that happened. But I also had this experience years later. I was sitting in my backyard, not a mystical experience. And suddenly it seemed like the grass surrounding me, the place was just me and the grass, like the outside, like this was me. And somehow, I don't know why, but the thought came to me, you know, when Saint Bernadette saw Our Lady of Lourdes, she wasn't really there on the rock. It was within her that it was projected out. So, in some sense, all of these manifestations of Mary were the person who saw them coming. Because, you know, when I hope this isn't too confusing, but, you know, when people ask Jesus, well, who is God? Well, God is love. Well, where is God? The kingdom of God is within you. And where I am, so is my Father. So, what does that mean in real terms? I don't know. We'll never know. It's a mystery, right? But I tried to allow, when I wrote this book, the flow of, and there were lots of other things. I mean, I once had an image which scared me. And it was not mystical. I was still in my body, in bed, a normal person. And I looked at the foot of my bed. And here is this, the only way I could describe it is like, I knew it was Mary, but it was like a Cezanne picture. It was completely abstract. And I got filled with what I thought was dread. like there was an energy that was sort of present and maybe coming inside of me. And it felt like dread, but then later I realized it was awe. It was beyond what I could understand. It was awe. But see, those things, I don't know, I hope this is not too much about the religious stuff,
It's
but
okay. It's okay.
when I once made a retreat in Bethlehem, Connecticut, the contemplative Benedictine nuns. And in October, I had made a retreat and with the Jesuits. I don't make a lot, maybe once every 6 months, once a year. Now it's once every 10 years. And the Jesuits, they'll give you something to reflect on. And then you spend time with that and you talk to them. So he gave me the Bethlehem narrative. And I thought, that's ridiculous. It's October. Like I'm thinking linearly, right? It's October. Well, I reflected on it and it was all right. It was nothing earth shattering. The only thing that I said to him was, it's very strange when I was praying the rosary and I came to the birth of Christ, I had what they call the prayer of silence, which every religion has. You're completely present in a way, and you're not thinking or whatever. I mean, it's not an out of body experience. So I said, I don't know what that means, but that's what happened. And it didn't mean anything to me. So the following year, I'm going to make a retreat. And I said to my friend Judy Bruder, I said, I don't know where to go. I don't want a talking retreat. I just want to, she said, well, why don't you go to Bethlehem, Connecticut? Because I have a friend there and it's a contemplative there, shelter, cloister, right? It's Bethlehem, Connecticut. So that week, in fact, I can tell you when it was because my daughter Jane, who was born in 1965, was 16 because I had taken her to the city on her 16th birthday and we had dinner with the brothers of today. So I'm speaking to Brother John and I said, I'm going on retreat. And I said, the last time I went on retreat, the Jesuit gave me this thing, I didn't say what or anything. I said, yeah, what do you think I should meditate on, like on the retreat? He said, why don't you meditate on the Bethlehem narratives? And I thought, I can't believe this. The same thing happened last year, and I'm going to Bethlehem, Connecticut. I don't like adding things up, I have to tell you. It's one of my objections to rigid charismatics is they think all the numbers have to align. I think that's scary because God is more than all of that. But sometimes they do align. So anyway, I say to myself, because believe me, I'm my mother's daughter. I'm very concrete. I'm not looking for anything supernatural to happen. So I go to Bethlehem, Connecticut, and I think I'm not even going to read the scripture. I'm not going to look for something to happen. I'm just here to try to be present to God. So I sit down, I say, all right, now it was evening, Friday night, and I open the scripture and I read, and it was the first census, and my brain exploded. It was like, oh my God. And I saw how everything is connected. Like I felt it, like the first census, everybody's springing back to their origins. So Jesus is born in Bethlehem, right? And the shepherds, they weren't near, they were far away on a mountain. Why did they have awe or dread or awe? Because we're all connected. Like they knew something had happened in the body of the human family. They knew it intuitively. Like this is, I think, what all of us, regardless of what path we choose, we all know there's some connection between the inner and the outer, and that's the quest to have the relationship with both. I also love the fact, one of my favorite uh, mysteries in the Rosary is the finding of the child Jesus in the temple, because I can remember I was like in my 30s when I was praying that mystery, and it occurred to me that, oh, Jesus had an eruption of consciousness. Why? Well, he was surrounded by the holy men. They were on retreat. He was reading the word of the divine, and he recognized in his consciousness that he was divine. But the best part of that story is that he left with his parents because he was not meant to be some kind of an aesthetic. He was meant to live a normal life. And I think that is the great mystery and even with the body, like you'll notice this beautiful body and the sorrowful mysteries. I remember making the Stations of the Cross and saying, oh, they hated his body. He loved his body. He wasn't against the body. Now, we've done lots of things with the body in the church too that were very damaging. I mean, we haven't prepared people for marriage or erotic love. I mean, erotic love should exist between all people because we're all connected. But God forbid you should. I mean, it's a tragedy, all of the ways in which this becomes perverted. I mean, especially in the Catholic Church. I'm so glad that, we're so aware now that clericalism is no gift to priests. It strips them of their humanity. And I think that I think celibacy is a incredibly rich, and anybody who has any religious leaning knows that, that it's really saying I'm a part to have a special relationship with the inner person. Like Thomas Merton, people say, well, he became a hermit, but he was like so social. Yeah, he became a hermit because he couldn't live with, he had so much going on inside of him that he had to separate himself in order to express his life. But that's a vocation. I mean, not everybody has that vocation. But the point is that when I think of this, the cross or the suffering of the cross, and I think of all the things, and of course we do that to one another, which is how we participate in the ongoing suffering, because Christ is in us, right? And as much as you've done this to the least of my brothers, and boy, we better remember that. We better, and what's coming now with our poor undocumented in this country, we better remember that we are not a corporation. We are believers, and it doesn't matter if you believe in Jesus or not. I mean, some of the most wonderful philanthropic people in my life were Jewish. And I mean, it was not easy for me as a single parent. I went to school late in life. I went to Columbia when I was in my 50s. I got my doctorate when I was 73. And I tell you, the Jewish professors were so humane and philanthropic, and they were with me 100%. And that they can thank their ancestors for that, because that's a beautiful, beautiful charism, is this gift of hospitality, and supporting one another. So, like, when you read through all of the mysteries and the way I experience them, I try to make them alive for people, because and this, some of my own experiences are sprinkled. Like, one of the things that I know I say is whether it's for everyone, whether it's out of water or love or blood, or because I grew up in a house, and my mother went to daily mass. She was very devout. My father used to say she should have bought a house next to the church so she could just roll in. It was very funny. But no, I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so when we spoke, because we had a really interesting household. We spoke about all kinds of things. She loved Dorothy Day, and she was very interesting. She loved Thomas Merton. We were reading all those books when we were young. She'd say, well, yeah, we're baptized through water into the body, but if you love, if you're committed to love, then you're connected to that baptism. Or if you offer your life, like in Holocaust, people who had no religion but didn't want to see people suffer, they offered they're included in the body of believers. So we can't judge. We're not God. I always say, I don't think I could believe in a God who would think that a native in the Amazonian jungle who didn't know the name of Jesus, but loved everybody, wasn't admitted into celestial splendor. We limit God. We put him in a little box. And some of it in this country, I think, is directly related to trying to cope with immigration and oppression and prejudice, which, okay, it has its time. And now it's time. And I'll tell you, in my view, the person who has their finger on the pulse is Pope Francis. There are many, many things that need to be addressed, and I think he knows it, but he knows the most important thing is synodality, because many of our parishes, it's not even their fault. It's just the way they grew up. They're corporate. They're not gospel communities. They're corporate. That doesn't mean that there's not authority and that you shouldn't be professional, and that people shouldn't be paid. But once you lose the ability to gather with the people and hear what they're saying, the Holy Spirit is stifled. You can't hear it. And if you think that you're the one that dishes out whether people can do this or do that or do this, you're acting like you're in a corporation, not in a parish. That's very challenging, because, I mean, many of the people who are serving, they're tired. They have a lot of work. There's not as many priests as there were. And also, I think it's a defense. I think people, listen, I love ritual. I love vestments. In fact, in Beaune, France, there's a hospice. It's the first hospice that was ever created in medieval times. And if you go there, there's like all these two beds in a row, rows of them. And at the front is this very famous triptych. And there's all the vestments, the colors, and the bed sheets and the spreads match the vestments. So the people who are dying and are sick are invited into this mysterious thing, in their life. And so I love all that. And I love a Latin mass if it's preserved as a spiritual art, but not for the common person. We would have no religion if Vatican II didn't happen and we didn't start speaking in English, because especially in this age of communication, you have to have that. I heard someone recently say, well, maybe we went too far with Vatican II. And I thought the person lacked imagination. We didn't go far enough. They lacked what's happening now. And I mean, this is very related. I mean, I hope that this book is an inspiration and encouragement. That's the only reason I wrote it for people, because we are now at the crux of immense shifts and change, immense. And I think that, there are errors on all sides. The people who become rigid and fearful and they start building shelters and saving water and having guns and thinking we should have Latin masses, they really lack faith. And that's not wisdom. They lack faith. And the people who think they're elite and they really understand, and why don't these people, they're so ignorant, that we should be accepting of everything and everyone, they don't help anybody either. The reality is we have to dialogue and we have to say what's fair, what's real, you know.
So many of these battles have gone on for so long. Jan Hus, one of my spiritual heroes, was working to get the Mass in colloquial language in the late 1400s. And of course, back then, the church militant meant literally armed forces.
Oh yeah.
And and to hear the echoes of that same problem, that same misunderstanding, is to me it says we're slow learners. Some of us are very, very slow learners.
Very wise. I think that you're absolutely right. I think it's like you build a crescendo. It's like these things have been going on for hundreds of years. But it's like, I mean, I love Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And I think a lot of his work and a lot of the work in this book is about how is it that we are meant to be one and not lose our distinction as a person. And he speaks eloquently on that love differentiates. That's just a little dribble of what he says. And I don't pretend to understand everything he says. I do know that I have read people who attempted to interpret him, and I felt that they were not interpreting him. But I think there are some very good examples of people who are bringing his work forward, in the American Teilhard Association and Ilia Delio. They're doing a really good job of saying, okay, because he died in the 50s, right? But of course, mystics span centuries. So
Right.
it's not like he's talking from the 50s. He's talking from like 2000 years ahead of time. Like this idea of the pearl of the cosmos, which was the title of the book, comes from his meditation that everything in creation prepared for her arrival. Like, and that means everybody, the body, I mean, we can't possibly understand all that, but the cosmos, the whole earth, everything prepared. And this simple woman was born. And, like sometimes it's very interesting, the Immaculate Conception, which I believe very much in the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption. And I think it is a profound, incredible understanding of women. I mean, it's profound, but what does it mean? Well, of course, I would never be able to say what it means, but I will say that I think it has something to do with the fact that Mary was never divided within herself. Her body, mind, and spirit was in complete communion, and that meant she was herself, complete in the Trinity and with her neighbor. We experience that in dribs and drabs, but whatever happened in our evolution, we're kind of broken. And a lot of the 12-step programs are practices to get back to integration. Like they know, like the third step, for example, that they have to surrender. It's not passivity, it's active passivity. It's saying, I surrender because my self-will has not gotten me further. I surrender so that I can hear, either through reading or through people or through meetings or through others, I can hear another, support that can lead me to greater truth. And those steps can be practiced by anybody. I mean, I recently did a retreat with 9 couples, phenomenal people. And what I said to them is that you're engaged in this practice in the intentional use of self. You're the instrument. You don't just unconsciously interact. You can learn about communication. You can learn about when to communicate. You can learn about boundaries. You can learn about a lot of things, but you're always listening for something greater than your self-will. That's real. And I also tell them, and many people, maybe 90% of what happens in your head, you should ignore it. And I give them examples of myself, how I go into these great lectures. If I'm misunderstood, my ego is so ready to defend me and tell me. And then I say, you realize this is crazy. I said, that's the third step. I give it to you. I'm not doing well with this. So I think that, what the rosary does for anyone really is, it's first of all, it's very personal for them. They're unique. And that's what Teilhard emphasizes, that only by becoming who you are, whatever that is, whatever the path is, can you really become close to everyone else. Like that's the entry, that's the portal. Because the divine, however one understands that, even if it's to understand energy, like you had a Wiccan person on one of the things and she was talking about energy. Well, I think that's a manifestation. I might understand it differently, but certainly is an energy in us. Um,
Let me ask let me ask you another question. The young Therese, were there teachers or mentors that spoke to you that recognized the writer, the philosopher Therese?
I think it was a very mixed bag. I mean, I think the love of my family was very important, because even when I was going through, which I did go through, the dark night of the soul, which was not a nice experience,
Sure.
um, uh, I was always supported in that. And what maybe not understood, they might not have understood me, but I was always supported in that. And that support allowed me the freedom sprinkled throughout my education. Oh, well, actually, 2 people, I don't know. I don't say this to flatter myself. I say it because it was a question for me. When I was a nurse's aide, I worked with another nurse aide who was from Hungary. She was a nurse in Hungary, and she was Jewish, and she had the numbers, during the Nazi regime. She was incarcerated. And she said to me once, I don't even know what we were talking about. And I was probably in my young 30s. She said, Therese, someday you're going to do something very important. I don't know what it is, but I have that feeling. And I thought, that's very strange. I mean, it didn't, it is being nice, but it didn't have meaning. And my own mother said that to me once. She turned around, she said, I don't know what it is. And I thought, well, maybe just because I have interests different than theirs and it impressed them. I didn't know. And I don't even know if what I do is important. I think that a lot of people did very important things for people with AIDS. Some of my professors, I think, recognized it, but I had not developed my voice yet. Because I remember one professor in particular, I knew that he wanted to work with me on my dissertation because he thought I was something brainy, insightful. And I thought, oh, he doesn't know. Like I didn't have a bad, I felt, confident, but I don't even know. Like I had not developed my voice yet, really. But he had confidence. And I also there in Colombia, it was not easy in my 50s after, having a challenging life to go. And it was very demanding and I worked very hard. And there were two professors that I had there who and my Judith Marks, who is my advisor, they saw who I was. I did not even see it as much. In fact, Judith Marks was very funny. I was so used to, the kind of passive voice in healthcare. Like you never say, I said, the doctor said, the nurse said, the this said. And I would tell her things that happened in one of my classes, and she'd say, Thérèse, I know you don't believe this, but you really don't have to tell me everything. And I I said, I know, but I'm afraid not to. Like I was still struggling to find my voice. And actually my daughter Jane helped me to find my voice. So the family was important because I remember saying to her, I am so tired of my doctoral advisor, Tricia Joyce, kept sending it back to me and saying I'm speaking in the passive voice. I can't claim like because I was reading everything. It took me forever because I'd read this and then they'd quote this and then I'd read her book and then I said, I can't say I said that. I have all these wonderful people that are addressing this. She said, but Mom, now it's your turn to talk. And when she said that, Rick, it cleared the whole thing up for me. I realized I talk and then I say, and that's supported by so and so. But I wouldn't have chosen so and so if I didn't think it was important.
Yep.
So that kind of, and I see that in a lot of people, and a lot of people that I hear, I realize that there's a lot there, but they haven't developed their voice. But a lot of my support, I mean, I think what it was is people allowed me to experiment, different. I mean, naturally, I was very committed to my parish, so that meant a lot to me. I'm also a third order Franciscan, and because I knew that I wanted something more than the regular parish was giving me, and I loved St. Francis and his whole sense, and he changed medieval Europe by, his desire to share with everyone. And he also understood that war was not a good thing. In the middle of the Crusades, he's thinking he's going to defend the country. And he said, this is terrible. This is all killing people. And he became very good friends with the Shah. And so those things spoke to me about the evolution and the temporality of things and that things are always changing. At the same time, it's not transactional. And I think that's a very big problem today. And I think, who talks a lot about that is Ian McGilchrist. He's a neuropsychiatrist. And he says, that the left side of the brain is okay. It knows how to use the instruments and the information. But the right side of the brain is really the relational side, the imaginative side, the intuitive side. And he said it sees the big picture. So everything's in flux. You know how to use it, but you're always changing. But if you get stuck in the transactional part, which he thinks and I think, the political transactional lens does not lead to transformation. It doesn't believe in it. It only believes in power. The relational part leads to transformation, and that's the co-creative part that we're involved in. We're not the creators. And I think that in most religions, they show the picture of death, not to say. I mean, I think they got stuck in this in the past. This life is about preparing to die. No, it's to say, measure everything you're doing by the next step. and for some people, the next step is I'll be part of the earth. For some people, it's some kind of nirvana. Some people, it's coming back again. And for many of us, it's a cosmic land of love. We don't understand what that means, but we do believe that we are opening ourselves more and more to it the more we share. I mean, that's the point of, I think, Jesus. I mean, he didn't at his Last Supper wash the feet for nothing. He wasn't saying, I'm a good guy, I'm humble. He was, yeah, he was saying, if you don't see the connection between you and other people, you are closing the door yourself. Nobody's closing it for you. Yeah, you might have material gains and you might have a sense of authority and power, but it's all going to end. But your transformation will never end. And that's kind of the meaning. I mean, I saw that with people with AIDS, is that sometimes they would say things like, well, I have nothing. Like some were in school, they were architects. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? Some of them had just had recovery and they were doing so well and they had families. And they would say, well, like I have nothing. And I'd say, oh, I don't think you have nothing. I think you should get a doctorate in life. I mean, people couldn't live through what you're living through. I mean, they couldn't really. Like you talk about acute trauma. Their trauma was acute, yes, because everyday things happen, but it was also chronic. Sometimes they lived for years with their friends dying every week. I mean, it was unimaginable the challenges that they had, and surrounded by stigma and stereotyping as well. So anyway, all of these things, they give you perspective, right? And so naturally throughout my life as I'm praying the rosary, which is a very powerful prayer, for everyone. It's not just for Catholics, it's for everyone, and I had a great friend. In fact, my friend the Brutus, who were Jewish, raised Jewish, and Frank uh, continued to be Jewish, and his Judy wasn't. She came into the Catholic community, and we went to Taizé, France. They treated me my first time because I didn't have money, and they did, and only because they were so humble and like a brother and sister to me could I accept it. But he was hilariously funny, and he used to say, "I don't have a problem. I just change the name Jesus. Whenever we get to Jesus, I change." To me, that's humility. It's like, oh, I'm not going to say that. It's like, I love diversity. I love like the Hanukkah songs and I loved Indian bhajans. I mean, we're all people. We're all connected. So anyway, I try to, I mean, I don't try, it's natural to me to try to have that kind of sentiment in all of my thoughts. And also I do a little stuff with time that's different. Like I know that in the baptism that Elijah didn't come with. I know that he came with the transfiguration, but that was such a momentous thing when the heavens opened, and we all know the Father was there and spoke. We all know that. I mean, if you read the scripture and the Holy Spirit, but there was something about I wanted the heavens, the ground to open up, and the people in heaven to be visible, and like this was a big thing. So like it's not all like say realistic, but it helping people to be close to the mysteries and to imagine and for it to give them confidence that as Father Owen said, we're safe. We're
Let me
loved.
ask you a question. Um, Everything that you've been saying has been so wonderful and such a blessing. I wouldn't exchange it for a moment, but I'm going to ask a couple, should we say, poetic questions. One I always love to ask is, there's a spectrum of opinion about writing. Some people write only when there's inspiration. They feel they should be humble and wait for inspiration to come, and only then is it a worthy task. Others say, no, no, I should write every day to hone my craft so that when inspiration does come, then I'm prepared. Where do you fall on that spectrum from one extreme to the other?
That's a really good question. I don't really have a really good answer for it, except to say that I think methods are as different as people. I love Flannery O'Connor. I mean, she's like a muse to me. I should have said her in the beginning because I just love her. And somebody said to her, because she was a devout Catholic, but such irony. I loved her irony. She unmasked the fake. And somebody said to her, "Oh, you're so spiritual and so inspired. I guess you wait, for the spirit to move you." She said, "Well, I think when I sit down from 9 to 2, the same spirit is there." And I admire that. I admire people who hone their craft. I admire people who critique their craft or want others. I admire that so much. I I am not somebody who waits for inspiration, but it happens sometimes because I think this is what I think happens. I wouldn't say I'm fundamentally, I am a poet, but I wouldn't say I'm fundamentally a poet. I would say there are so many aspects of my life, like being a social worker is one of the most noble professions in the world. And I'm always a social worker. I have practice still. I mean, I work with those 9 couples, which was a great gift, really. Um, and I work with many other people. I'm a parent and I'm a grandparent, and that's very important to me. I'm very involved in my parish. That's very important to me. I'm always trying to listen and read what others are saying, whether it's from theology or philosophy or whatever. So sometimes, like I might have said this once, that I had a couple in my group and they had a son named John, and beautiful young playwright. And we were all, tormented with them because he told them every pain and every fear he had. And there was not much you could say to comfort them except to listen. And this went on for many, many months. And one day I woke up, because of course we carry this stuff with us. We don't know we are, but we do, right? And I started to write this poem, and I think it's called Johnny. I think it's probably one of the best poems I've ever written. And it was spontaneous, but I don't think it was spontaneous. I think that the intuition and imagination is working all the time. It just was the moment for it to come. So I do think that when you say to people like, "Oh, you only write when you're inspired," I don't believe that's the case. I think that we carry these different questions and challenges and impressions with us, and then the moment comes when they're there. But I think that I'm more critical of my poetry now since I'm going to Zooms than I ever would be, which improves it. In fact, when I started to write this Rosary, I wanted to do, because I thought a haiku forces you to really say only what's essential. So I thought I'm going to do a haiku for each mystery. So I did a couple of haikus, and I thought they were really good. And I went to one of the Zooms in Hudson Valley, and Bob Zaslow, who is a very good children's writer. And I'm listening, and people like them very much. They were very nice. People like it. He said, "They're very nice, but they're not haikus." And I said, "They're not haikus." Like deflated. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, we do have much more poetic license today than ever. But a real haiku, like the ancient ones, would end with the shocker, with the essential thing. And I like that idea. So even though I didn't continue to write haikus, I tried to ask myself, what in this mystery is really the power of it? So, in a certain sense, I was haikuing myself, but they're not written as haikus. But I didn't like, even I struggled with the presentation in the temple, which you could say a million things about that, where the lady Anna is waiting for, years, decades for the Savior to come, and Simeon's there, and Our Lady and the piercing of the heart. There's so much you could say there, but the thing that I thought that taught us was constant faith and patience. And in the end, I say, what is Anna? Like, what does it mean that, what's the meaning of that? Because that's our question when we're praying. It's not my question. It's like, what is that about? Well, her life and her faith, of course, she lived her daily life, I'm sure, had meaning because within her was the call to wait. It was a special vocation. And sometimes within us, it's our call to wait for one of our children. Maybe they've gone astray. Maybe they need a good job. Maybe it's our spouse. Maybe it's our marriage. But within us is this capacity to wait. Everything, and I'm a big believer in therapy, but everything can't be chopped up into psychobabble, like boundaries and codependence. And it's useful. They're useful, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So what is it that this woman, I mean, some people could say, what kind of life do you have hanging out of the temple waiting for the Savior to come? But there's some drama taking place within her and in her life that she's called to. And the same thing can be true. I had a brother that struggled with substance abuse, and my mother, who was, I think, a saint par excellence. She was very real and very ordinary. She didn't put up with any baloney, but she was very big believer. She said to my brother, you know, you can do what you want. But if you disappear, you're putting my life at risk. I'll go into the Bowery and I'll lift every face of every person that's in a corner until I find you. So it's up to you if you want to risk my life. And I thought, that's Anna in the temple. She's waiting. The time came and it became beautiful. But sometimes we have to be the faith that other people don't have. Sometimes we have to do that. And it's important to know when and when not too, because you don't want to drown. You don't. Sometimes you have to take care of yourself as well.
Let me
But
ask you this. Um, if a young person came up to you and said, I write poetry from time to time, but yeah, I wonder, is it really something that's worthwhile? Should I waste my life doing it? Is it a waste, or is poetry have its own intrinsic value? What do you say to that?
I think it has its own intrinsic value. I think, like, I joke with somebody about, I'm actually giving a lot of people my books that locally, and I'll be sending books. And I said, most poets really don't think they're going to make much money. I mean, it's great if you do. We'd like to, and we all need money. Poets buy other poets' books. That's the people who buy the books, right? And hopefully they'll be successful. But I think, Thomas Merton once said, we're flooded with information, and the cyber age is even worse, right? He said it will be the small note handed from hand to hand that will transform people. And I think that the poet is trying to do a very important work. John Foss, who has received the Nobel Prize for Poetry, and actually he's Catholic. I don't know if you knew that. He came into the Catholic Church. Interestingly, he said, every institution has its problems, but you can't carry a faith without an institution. But it was the only place that he felt in his life that could challenge capitalism, the Roman Catholic Church, because of the essential beliefs. Even if people don't live them, then lying to themselves, right? But he talks about saying the unsayable. Like, that's what he's trying to do. And actually, that was not new to me. I was very impressed many, many years ago. I read a book that my friend Jonathan Sillen had told me to read called The Unsayable, and it was about Lacan, psychiatry, and psychology, and how a woman who wrote the book was sexually abused in strange ways by her mother. But anyway, to make a long story short, her understanding of pedophilia was that many, if not all, pedophiles have had the experience of being sexually abused. But it's so deep in their cells of their body that they cannot give voice to it. It's so repressed, they're so oppressed, it's so terrifying, shame based, it's stuck in their brain, it's stuck in their body, that the only way they can possibly say anything about it is to enact it, which is a tragedy, right? and that's only one thing. But then I also read, so I was very impressed by that. But then when I was doing my research, I read an indigenous researcher, I think in New Zealand, no, in Canada. And it was during a strike when they had the nurses on strike in the 70s, I guess. And the woman doing the research knew that the people who suffered the most were women nurses. The men were kept on, right? So she had groups, and she said, and they would talk about their experience, but they couldn't name it. They couldn't name sexism. She said it was as if they were trying to say something, but didn't have the language. It was unsayable because it was never said before. And someone, I don't remember who, but a very famous poet said that one of the jobs of poets is to make the unsayable sayable. So I think that every person who feels even a personal call or desire to write poetry should write poetry, because it could be just personally transformative, which it was for me for a long time. Or like when you go through the dark night, who's going to understand that? You don't even know how to talk about it, right? But I could write about it. And writing about it gave me some relief and some understanding of it, because when we go through these things, we think, well, that's only for the good guys, the saints, no, it's for everybody. It's like it's the quest to discover who you are. And I was even saying that to my daughter the other day. We were talking about, how you could have spiritual experiences and stuff, and people tend to think, oh, that's a holy person, but it's not a holy person. It's a person, for whatever reason, needed to have this experience to continue. So you read the saints and they'll say, oh, I was nothing but a worm, or and you say, oh my God, didn't they realize how holy they were? They weren't holy. They knew they weren't holy. They knew who they would be. In fact, one of the greatest lessons I think that I learned was from a friend who I knew when she was a kid, and she's now a cloistered Carmelite. And that group is very interesting. She became a cloistered Carmelite, and another friend who was Episcopalian became a minister and is now transgender, and a very holy soul. I mean, just very interesting. But anyway, I went to see her and I was laughing. I said, once I went on a hermitage retreat. I said I wanted to go on a hermitage retreat. So I went on a hermitage retreat on Long Island, and I said, and my brain, I was so cranky. I was criticizing everything, the food, the place, the nuns. I felt like the body snatchers took over. I kept saying, what is the matter with me? I mean, I don't think like that usually. And then I thought, well, God is telling me I don't show up on demand, because that's what I thought was going to happen. I am going to a hermitage. God is going to come. And God is saying no. So I said this to her, and I said, so I didn't really benefit except to know that that was a stupid thing. And she said, oh, you learned a lot. I said, I did? What did I learn? She said, you learned who you would be without grace. And I thought to myself, that is so true. And that is a beautiful thing. It doesn't mean, like, people think of that as false humility, or, oh, please, you think only God is good and people aren't good. They go all over the place with this stuff. No, I think that we were meant to be illumined and sustained by a higher power greater than us. And that higher power allows us to be ourselves and to be close to one another. So it's not about, I mean, like, there's a big thing to the big push, which I think is really evolutionary. Everybody's a contemplative. I believe that too. But I don't think it's a product. Like, I was looking when I went to the Hermitage for a product. I'm going to the Hermitage to get God. God doesn't show up like that.
I'll be
So,
waiting.
so I guess all of this is an answer to your question. I'm very process, as you can see. I don't think. Uh,
That's perfectly fine, my dear. That's what we want to learn. We want to learn a little bit about you. Now, only two more questions. Next to the last question, what do you read for fun?
do I read for fun? Well, I mean, I go back to comics. I love comics and comedies and things like that. I am not, I'm very selective in what I read. I've always liked philosophy, theology. I did read Boys in the Boats, which was a phenomenal book. I love that book. I don't like romance novels and anything like that. What I do for fun, though, is I do like the really sharp comedy TV, or their podcasts. I because I think they have a lot to teach us. They're not all perfect. Bill Maher can be disgusting, but he also can be the funniest thing on the face of the earth. I think that that's part of who we have to be, even in our poetry Zooms. There's so much diversity, right? And I think it's about being curious and really hearing what people have to say and to respect the diversity, like everybody is. And I do think there's a lot of respect for that because I'm amazed at the response. I'm really amazed at the response that I get to some. I don't always read spiritual things, but some of the spiritual things, because I know people all have their knapsacks full of resentment about Christianity and the church, and I try very hard not to to just keep loving them, and they have their journey, and not to feed into that or to be defensive, or it's a work, really. But I think people are hurt, people resent things, and they think they're hearing that, like the rosary. People think they're hearing this. My rosary has nothing to do with what they think they're hearing. I know that. They don't know that. Well, that's life. I mean, maybe they'll learn it, maybe they won't. But I have to be just as attentive when they are challenging or dealing with subjects that maybe I see differently. But I have to be curious enough to be respectful that they're on a journey and that's where they're at. So, I mean, I think we're really lucky that we live in this age where we have all these opportunities to hear from one another.
Last question on this part of the show. Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, I guess I wonder, like, what's the most essential thing for you in your life at this period of your life?
I find that I have had such a privilege to have people that I can love and who love me back, friends who've made my life so rich, and that I get no greater pleasure than to be able to help one of these incredible beings that touch my life. And I, as an example, I was helping a friend solve a problem, a technical problem. And I had to go to another friend's house because I didn't have that particular piece of software. And I was over there and I thought, well, I will know in a minute if my theory on how to solve this problem, I'll know in a minute. So I said, but I have to ask you guys, can I borrow your computer to solve this problem? And they said, yeah, sure. Well, in just a moment, I knew the answer. I solved the problem, and I said, "Yay!" I was just so happy. And friends, they came from different parts of the house. They're like, "So obviously, you solved the problem." And I said, it's granted, it's hard to separate the pride of solving a problem, but the real joy, came from being able to help my friend. And they looked at me, and they're very religious in their way, and they're to me, what is beautiful about their religiosity is they're not offended that I don't believe as they do. They take me as I am. They know I'm a pretty decent human being. And they said, wow, we can really tell you're so happy. Why are you happy? And I said, I'm happy because I get to solve a problem for a friend. And to get
That's
that joy. And,
that's
and as a person who does counseling, when you can help someone through a breakthrough, that's a grace. That is a grace from above, beyond, wherever you want to call it.
no,
It's just a great
it
feeling.
is, there's nothing more important. There's nothing like living present in the day and being able to help another person. There's nothing more important. It's like my daughter now is on a conference, my daughter Jane, and she's so impressed with the people that she's on the conference with. And some of them are younger than her, and it's very evaluation and stuff like this. And she said, "I'm so proud of them," and that makes me. And they're not really her good friends; they're just people that she worked with. And it made me feel so good. And it made me remember when she was a kid, she always got the lead in the singing, like for the plays and all. And one year in high school, somebody else got it because she got it 2 years in a row. And she thought that was fair. When that girl started singing, my daughter's face, there was a smile from ear to ear. She was so pleased with her performance. When you are with a friend, I don't care who you are, and you can do something like that. That was a very, very beautiful example of all the stuff we were just talking about, actually. Loving your neighbor. That's what it's all about, really. And that is transformative. You see, to do something like somebody said that, I forget who, somebody on one of the news said, he was really good. I should have written his name down. Somebody was saying, well, what do you see the difference in politics today, right? And he said, well, he said, it all depends on your motivation and what you believe, the lens you're looking through. He said, if you think, like Marx, everything's about who has the power, that's how you're going to live. But if you think that what we're doing together has meaning, then that's going to change how you are to other people and how you're working. And you exhibit the other side. You exhibit that it has meaning to help a friend to get through something that you can solve. What's more important? That's beautiful, but it doesn't surprise me because I said before we started that you deal with very heavy subjects in your poetry, very heavy. You always have wisdom in them, but they're also funny and fantastical so that as you're carrying the message and people are examining it and seeing the turn, there's something about it that says it's still hopeful. If you can reflect in that way about the disaster we're in right now, that tells me there's hope.
But I do want to have you read a little bit of your work. In fact, I want to read one of your pieces too. I think they're
Oh, I
just
love this. I
they're
love
so beautiful, dear. They're so very beautiful. I I said this before. To me, you take what could be very dry religiosity or philosophy, and so many of our friends would rather, I don't know, dissect a frog rather than read philosophy. But you so humanize it, and you give it such life
Thank
that
you.
I I know that your readings of the Rosary and your studies of over the years and your humanity have imbued your writing with such spirit. It's well, yeah, you just have my utmost respect. I can't say any better than that. So let me bring that lovely book of yours that is called, oh my goodness, in front, The Pearl of the Cosmos, the Rosary. What a lovely name. What 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 brought you to that name?
Well, I knew it was the rosary, but it was how I understand Mary. And believe me, I mean, it's only a little attempt because this, how could you ever really talk about Mary? But Teilhard, the way he understood creation, it's just incredible, and you can get archives of everything he ever wrote. And he is the one who said so much prepared for this event in human life of Our Lady, and in the whole cosmos, she was the pearl of the cosmos. So I love that title. And actually, somebody wrote a paper recently, Pearl of the Cosmos, but I wrote one before that. I had a little chat book that I called just Pearl of the Cosmos, but now this is called Pearl of the Cosmos, the Rosary.
So, this incredible book. Uh, where can people find it? Where can they obtain it? Is it
Just on Amazon, my name, Dr. Thérèse Crane Birch on Amazon.
okay? Um, the uh, the
You
next thing I wanted to mention. Go ahead.
just have to mention that, John McMullen and his wife Barbara were kind of the editors. I would never have been put this up on Amazon. I don't know how to do any of that stuff. I'm terrible at it. And John's been going through a lot of health issues, and his wife has been so supportive, and he's doing much better. And we're all happy to hear that. But I owe them a lot, I should say that.
Oh, that's nice. Um, I'm going to read one that I think is very, very lovely and combines that that wonderful ability to humanize that I find so impressive. Beyond your wisdom, which is monumental, my dear, you'll please let me embarrass you a little, but you have such a light touch, and I think of it as like you put flesh on what could be simple philosophy. You do it beautifully. Thank you. So I'm going to read this poem of yours, and then I'm going to have you read some, okay? And this says it's the wedding feast at Cana. Love and charity moved Our Lady as the wedding couple worried about the shame of running out of wine for the guests and blamed the poor planning. They couldn't see that Mary stood at the center of time to be mother of us all. She who could not bear the cruelty from the fall, and responded in her body and urged her son to overcome this need, as when she first gave birth to co-create and save humanity. Our Lady did not even heed his warning that his time had not come. The plan was undone for the sake of the couple. Charity moved the Creator to touch the emptiness, and in that big bang of all time and space, the stars and planets gave way, and the seas and all living things were to prepare for humanity. The simple couple, created free, fell out of rhythm from the apple growing on the tree of life. Now, suffering was an encounter every day, but this gave way as now the cosmic One stands among us and moved by loss again turned water into wine for them. Will you transgress your narrow lens? Beautiful,
Oh, thank
beautiful.
you. It's a touching mystery, isn't it? It's so touching. It's I mean, I heard it my whole life. I prayed it my whole life. It's a bit confusing, right? Until, as you grow in other ways, you begin to understand something, And I think it's again the question of time, like how we are limited by our understanding of time. And we always will be. We'll never really get the mystery, but at least it gives some sense that yeah, there's all this creative process taking place in the cosmos, but here's this little couple, and they were embarrassed, and Our Lady loved them. See, that's what I love about the stories, is that the same thing when Jesus understood conscious, like I end that one, which is I think kind of funny, like what good does it do to know your God? Like he had to leave with his parents. But that's the important part of the whole thing. We're just people.
Please, would you read one of your favorites?
And you read that beautifully, by the way. I love
Thank you.
I don't often hear people reading it, and I love to.
Thank
I
you.
don't. Do you have any that you'd like me to read, or?
Oh, my dear, any one of these are so lovely. How about Agony in the Garden?
Okay.
It's down toward the end.
The agony in the garden. I cannot turn away from love. As all the stored up evil in the world swirled within my head, I tried to center myself, but bled instead. While love was more or less sustaining me, I did not flee. I pressed my Father to deliver me from the dead. I must be enveloped in empathy as I see my friends with terror striking at their hearts. Now, awake from their grief, they stand apart from me and seek to hide their identity, as they often do. Yes, it's true. Still, they must never turn, as daily they must seek to renew that love that binds us to one another forever. I cannot turn. I cannot turn from their faces. I look for traces of kindness and that love we share, as I am hard pressed, close to despair. Soon it will be my death that spares them all. With each cosmic task we are assigned in time, whether large or small, and of which transformation for all depends, we shudder. Will we forsake the work of love we come upon with one another? Will you stay awake?
Beautiful, beautiful. You know, I think that that metaphor is so profound. We all find ourselves in difficult situations from time to time. How we face them, what resources we bring, can we keep a long-term perspective? Sometimes problems that seem so overwhelming are really inconsequential in the long scheme of things. And I think you've captured a very important truth, and using that story, uh, that one can extrapolate in our daily challenges. Uh, I one point in my working life felt very much beset. Uh, a position that had been working so well and everything was going splendidly. Some new people were involved now suddenly in this company, and I needed to see that job through. I had two girls in college at the time. Expenses were great, and I thought, my gosh, things that had been going so well now with these other two characters involved, it's really being very difficult. And then I thought, rather than focus on the difficulty, see these as lessons, see these as challenges, find ways of learning from them. Where the ancients always taught us that everyone around us is our teacher. I need to focus on that part of the equation rather than how something that had been working so well now suddenly is a challenge. But beautifully done, a great lesson.
That kind of story strikes to the heart, though, Rick. You know how many people I see who come to see me in therapy because they're the ones that are skilled and talented, and they're very humble. They don't care if anybody knows it. They just want to do their job. And they're tormented by incompetent people who are transactional and just want power. And they see everything as power. And we live in a world like that. I could write a book about the jobs that I've had and the experiences that I've had. But I think what you're saying is, hey, broken people, broken world. And that's why it's so important to understand God is with us in our brokenness. We're not heroes, we're not saints, we're people trying to do the best we can do. We have great appreciation when God gives us special understanding or we can communicate. It's a great gift to be able to communicate, right? But it's like when you helped the guy fix the whatever the cyber kind of thing was. It's like that's what life's made up of. But this is not a small thing to talk about work. Your life could be tormented in work. When something recently happened with, I'm not going to get into politics or anything, but I did, I was talking to a friend of mine. We, think the same way. And the next day I called, I said, why are we surprised? We've both had terrible experiences in many of our work situations. And really, were the ones who were doing the effective work. It wasn't like, and we didn't care if people noticed. But it's like what you're talking about really is broken people, broken world. And that's the whole point of turning, like you say, trying to say, all right, I'm not going to pretend this is good. I'm not going to pretend they're good. But what can I learn? How can I deal? How can I cope? I was in a job once, I won't even tell you, it was horrendous. And every day I would go to work and I'd say, how did this happen to me? I'm creating all the programs. I don't care if they even notice me. Just leave me alone. Let me do my work. How did this happen to me? And this went on for months. I was sustained by grace. And then one day it occurred to me, why shouldn't it happen to you? It happens to everybody else all over the world. And I thought, I'm in solidarity with people who have these experiences, and they're always going to happen. And I mean, the thing that consoles me at this point in time is when I look at my origins, the early gospel communities, right? They were surrounded by Rome, who wanted nothing better to do but throw them at the lions. They were surrounded by the Sadducees and the teachers who hated them. And they were known for their love. People said, we know you're a Christian by your love, because the internal source of love was so alive in them that even some of the early Franciscans, they kind of regained that, because we lose it, we get perverted and strange. And they said they knew who they were because when they'd see each other, they would be full of happiness and joy at seeing each other. Like, that's the way we're supposed to be, right? Anyway,
Let me ask you to read one more. Uh, how about the proclamation of the kingdom?
okay.
It's about the first third in.
The proclamation of the kingdom. Our bodies circumvent the globe like sailing ships with news foretold. Now, the mystery of the divine was wrapped in the body of our mother as we walked for you, as there was no other means to share this good news. No cyber life or magazines, no literacy or other means to simply state we will not lose our lives at death. The breath of the incarnate plan to save mankind was afoot as we walked, and it took the charity of God who stood aside when first his creatures ran to hide. In the garden of love, they heard the voice of self will that divided them from their Creator. Still, no lover could ever be greater in loving them into their very being. It seemed there was another way, and so they turned and went astray. But love incarnate had their way, and now we walk to spread that news. Love overcomes the subterfuge, and in sharing together, God becomes present, and so we are sent to walk for you and heal you too. Yes, it is true. In the turning, we become whole and are united to one another. From within, we project out, imagining our own ethnic traces and races in the face of our one mother, as sisters and brothers, with a birthright from her Son, who has made us one again. Repent and believe the good news is a simple turning toward the light of love, as love alone can end our plight. Repent is simply the turn to love, the endless treasure trove of creativity that never ends. Its cosmic destination is personal for each and all of us, too. We walk for you. Will you find a way to ease our dread that we're delivered from the dead and love alone can set us free? Will you walk with me?
Beautiful. It's so beautiful, Therese. Thank you so very much. Um, to hear these in your voice is a blessing. Is a blessing indeed.
So much.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here, and people across the globe will hear your voice and hear your work and share that wisdom that you presented us. I can't thank you enough. It's been an honor to speak to you.
Oh, thank you, Rick. It's been a pleasure and a joy. And I feel the same way about you. I think, we see ourselves in one another. That's why we appreciate it.
My dear, you have a wonderful day and happy holidays to you
Thank you.
and
You
all
too.
of yours.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.